Thank you, Saroja. That's great. Amita, can we go back to the agenda slide? Just leave it up there so that, although we don't need a slide up
We don't
there.
need a slide. We don't need a slide. I want to see
Just see it on
faces.
the panel view.
Yeah,
Actually,
don't put the slide. Yeah, unshare.
because
I
then
want to see
you
the
can't.
faces.
I agree. I agree. Let's just do the panel view. This is awesome. And everyone, feel free to turn on your videos, because since we are on a panel view, we can see each other, and it's a small group. We don't have hundreds of people, so if you don't mind, if you could turn on your videos, that would be wonderful. Great discussion. Great presentations by both Sanjeev and Saroja. I've been a voracious reader of stuff that's coming out on this topic, involved with a platform called covidb.org, where a lot of information is being put out. But frankly, I learned a lot of new things from both Sanjeev and Saroja's presentation. Pretty deep stuff there. But there were a lot of really good questions that were coming out, and we'll go through those as we go through this next 20 minutes. We're a short time, and we may not be able to go through all the questions. So I requested Sanjeev to start responding on the chat window, and Saroja, you may do that as well if you feel like it right now. But let me ask you the very provocative question to both of you, Sanjeev and Saroja, and if anybody else wants to weigh in, can weigh in. It's since the beginning of this crisis, whether you call it December the start point or January the start point, there's a lot that we have learned about this that we didn't know the day before or the week before. And as we are moving forward, there are new things that are being figured out all the time. And it's not just the cumulative data that's providing more resolution into what kind of people are being impacted and what sort of complications that are coming out. That's definitely part of it. But even virologically or serologically, there's a lot that we don't know. Can I ask both of you to conjecture as to what are the things that we don't know today about this virus and how it behaves, that we would be learning more about in the coming weeks and months? What kind of things? For example, there's a question about reinfection. There's a question about having antibodies that may not create immunity. Things of that sort. Could you talk about that? Maybe Sanjeev, you could go first.
Yeah. Ishita, I think Ishita just asked that question about biomarker and what is a disease. Yesterday, that paper that was published, I have the citation on my slide, said, they talk about this COVID-19 is a completely different disease. What they are seeing is that patients with asthma don't show up. They don't get infected. Normally, you would think that they are the ones with the weakest lungs. This is a lung disease. Typically what happens is a lung thing. They are the ones that get infected first. They don't see it as much. This seems like more like a metabolic disease, where the ones that are diabetic, having metabolic issues are showing up. There are and that slide that I had where you're seeing heart attacks, heart-related events, intestinal, kidney, pancreatic, and they're not going into intubations at all. They're just dying because of a completely different organ failure.
Can I ask two quick follow-up questions to that, Sanjeev? So there's a physician in New York, without any sort of real study, because he didn't have the research tools to study it, but he was saying that a lot of patients that he's seeing that are dying, they are potentially dying because of the interventions that they are performing in the hospital. So such as intubation and sort of more invasive form of ventilation. Could you talk about that in the context of what you just said?
Yeah, see, that is even a bigger question, because whether to intubate or not is a decision that the intensivist makes. It's a call that person makes, and clearly we are seeing 50% fatality intubated because of the intubation or because of the disease. There is septic events. So no, it's very hard to say. At this point, a lot of it is unknown. So whether to—
Can I make a comment?
Yeah, go ahead.
Ramani, you have a question?
Yeah, I want to just follow up on this discussion about the respiratory, the aspect that Anurag brought up. And I think I saw the same video from this doctor in New York. And what he was mentioning was that the conventional approach to treating this has been acute respiratory distress syndrome.
Correct.
In which the ventilator is set up to assist the muscle to pump more of the patient's own oxygen. And he felt that the symptoms that he was observing were more akin to what he called altitude sickness, where it's more of a lack of oxygen rather than a muscle problem, in which case the treatment approach has to be different. And so the ventilator settings have to be different and some changes are needed. So I wonder if, I don't think we have necessarily a doctor on our call, but anybody can comment on those kinds of issues being addressed.
So I think he was talking about ARDS protocol. So most of the hospitals, and my nephew just went through this at SF General. So I researched that a little bit more. He was talking about ARDS protocol, and that is on the pressure control mode. And I think we don't have a ventilator expert on the call to talk about that, but I think he was talking about a different mode of using ventilators. So pressure control versus maybe volume control or some other.
So Darshana just sent that article. That's the article that Darshana, thanks. That's the one that I was looking at. And we are going to learn a lot more. And everything that you're saying is correct, this is not just ARDS. You do see low oxygen levels that cannot be easily explained why this is happening. It's not just pushing our oxygen in using a ventilator. So only time will tell.
So Saroja, do you want to weigh in on that question? What are the things that we don't know today that we will learn?
Well, I think it ties very much back into what we were just hearing. And that is, as we learn more about what are the risk factors, what is actually causing the death, etc. While those seem like biological insights, they're also population insights. So in any of these kinds of modeling approaches, you need to understand how to bucket your population. What is really the risk? If you're going to be in a Michigan or a New York or a Detroit or a New York City where you have a large African-American population and you have pre-existing obesity, diabetes, and just generally inequity in healthcare through the years, then you have to revise the way you even statistically project what can happen to that population, or those fundamentally change the death rates that you may see, or the severity rates of infection that you will see in those places, rather than a San Diego or where you have a more a very different population, for example. In addition, I mentioned how, as we learn about the medical expansion, how do we expand medical care, etc. Maybe it's not just expansion of the system. Maybe it's not pure volume, but maybe it's how we manage, and maybe that leads to a faster turnaround and a faster exit from the hospital for patients who recover. And of course, the development of vaccines, the understanding of the infectivity at different stages, in the pre-symptomatic stage or the post-symptomatic stage, at the understanding of the durability of immunity that somebody may achieve after having been affected. That's all going to impact what we project will happen in the future.
Saroja, may I make a comment?
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to really thank you for the really nice overview on the projections, because I've been very confused about what people have been talking about it until you put it together. So it's just good to know, and the resources. The one thing that people don't seem to be addressing is there is a static picture of what happened initially with California doing extreme measures of social distancing. We're all following rigorously. And then New York got onto the act about a few weeks later. They had a discussion flight between Cuomo and de Blasio and all that.
Yep.
Then we have the whole spectrum of places like Florida and all these red states that are reluctantly following something, not completely. Even yesterday, he's opened up the beaches, for instance. And then we have completely eight states that don't even want to do anything about it. There's total, So how do you model these things in? Because I'm sure there's going to be a second wave. The question is, when is that going to hit? Based on, I don't know if any kinetic
can I add to what Ramani just asked? So is there going to be, so everybody's talking about second wave, but you also presented one of your slides, Saroja, about this being a tap that turns on and off, or a language like that. So it may actually be ripples that are many-fold rather than just a second wave. Could you weave that into your answer? And then we'll move on to the next question, which I'll channel to Sanjeev. Go ahead, Troy.
Sure. So first of all, in some of those models, they did look at things like how would a 2-week or a 1-week delay in implementing these strategies affect the death rate, and it was marked, or the hospital utility. It was marked. You're talking about an exponentially growing scenario. So a week is a huge, 2 weeks is a huge amount of time when you're talking about that number of people. So they have looked, I don't think they explicitly looked at New York versus California, given their initial conditions, their population density, et cetera. But for a given setup, a given location, 1 to 2 weeks is a huge amount of time to delay social distancing. They also have explicitly looked at things like what is the extent of compliance with social distancing. And they have made different projections. For one of the resources I have on the last slide actually says, what if you have very good compliance? What if you have poor compliance? And they show projections under those different scenarios. And even one of them looks at what if we put a compliance fatigue in, where for any length of social distancing, it starts out good. And after the first month, people start cheating because it's just like a diet, right? And they look at that too. And that can all be if we can really get this in place, and if we have an administration or administrations in the different states that want to look into this, they really can look into this with the computational models and try and make, at the very least, qualitative predictions about the impact of these different strategies. Is it really critical that we act now, or can we wait 3 days to see how things happen, or is that too late? And in terms of the timing of that wave, they do predict the timing of that wave based on when the social distancing is stopped and based on different strategies. But you have to also consider, one of the critical things is that they talk about case quarantine. And imagine if every time somebody tests, let's say you really could test everybody, and you know that your population, which has been closed, is past its wave. But now, if you're testing, if you could take every person who is even asymptomatic positive and put them in a bubble and just quarantine them for 3-4 weeks, theoretically, you would never get a second wave, because every time somebody showed up, they would be bubbled. But how pragmatic is that? What does that require in terms of testing? So yes, you can explore those things. Yes, retroactively, we should, while we look towards a second wave or a future pandemic even. But the explicit details have to be to that location. Absolutely. There's one last comment I could make is we also have to look at how much interconnection or movement or exchange of people occurs between these different sites. You know, I can say I don't really care what happens in Florida. If they're going to do that, fine. It's their problem. Except, guess what? Florida doesn't stay in Florida. Well, I do care what happens in Florida. There are people there. But even if I didn't, Florida doesn't stay in Florida. California doesn't stay in California. We're not going to be checking and shutting down all travel indefinitely. So we have to think about the pragmatics of this whole nationwide and worldwide dynamic.
Absolutely. So the great answer. So the next question, I'll go through some of the questions that are on the chat window. People have been patiently waiting for those. I think Sanjeev has responded to some of them. I've responded to some of them, and we'll follow up on others that we can't get to on this short Q&A session. But the next one is an interesting one because everybody is concerned about that, and there's a lot of uncertainty around it. And I'll bring that question to you, Sanjeev, because remember microhydrodynamics of surfaces course that we did it in Colorado, that's directly related to that. So the question is from Ravi. It talks about virus being airborne. How does it work? I mean, early on we were told that this is not airborne, that it actually, people don't need to wear masks because frankly, you can't really transmit it that way. It's really people who are infected who made projectiling, a spit or something that, a phlegm or something that could actually carry that, but that's the only way. So how does it work, and does it stay in the vicinity of the person who coughed or spoke or traveled farther? Or if you're just in, you're jogging behind somebody 2 or 3 or 4 or 6 feet, and somebody's just kind of, is breathing heavily, and can that actually infect? So can you talk a little bit about the hydrodynamics of that, and how does that work?
Yeah, I mean, it was Initially everyone thought that during incubation in these procedures, that's when these particles are generated. But there are now papers in Science and Nature, as well as German papers that did simulations in especially closed environments. So if there is no running air in the room, and if somebody sneezes or coughs, not only the distance to which their droplets travel, but then micro droplets are formed that could stay around for a couple of hours later even. And that was what this article had shown. Subsequent to that, there were multiple other articles that talked about the efficacy of N95, N99 versus cloth masks, surgical masks. And now it is very clear. I think Contra Costa or Bay Area is already requiring face coverings. My problem is that they're not as available now still as widely. I would like them to be available as chewing gum on any Walgreens and Targets. And I think we will have to wear, especially in closed spaces, keep social distancing. But I clearly it is transmitted. The respiratory is the way it is transmitted. And if you are in that room, then any person that has any semblance of onset of symptoms, respiratory symptoms, should isolate themselves. Yeah. I mean, in hindsight, it seems like simple in 2020, but micro droplets carrying has been known for a long time, as you know.
Yeah.
I'll send that article to Rob Davis, our advisor from Boulder.
That's right.
If I can clarify that quickly, let's say I'm walking in my neighborhood. Somebody just walked before me about 5 minutes back or 10 minutes back and had a cough or sneeze, and I'm just going through the same stretch. And if I don't have a mask, what happens to me?
So Belgium, in Belgium, there was an article that showed that, the 6 feet doesn't work if you're actually running behind someone and things like that. You have to, in my opinion, you have to use common sense. If somebody, first of all, in an outside environment, you talked about beach, right? Things are going to be carried away by breezes.
Yeah.
So utilize your judgment call. It's not like they're not contagious to the extent they're just going to find themselves and into your lungs. There's a certain viral load that person must be carrying. That viral load has to find way into your respiratory passage. You have to touch it. So, I mean, I don't think there is a clear.
Yeah, and my thought is that if you really want to be safe and you are a vulnerable population at a certain age or certain comorbidities, you should exercise all of the precautions.
Yeah.
Because it's a game of odds, and I think you talk about probability in there, Saroja. Absolutely. I mean, there are a lot of it's not a monodispersed population that we are talking about. So the same conditions may impact one person versus the other differently. So my recommendation would be to use personal protection if you're concerned about that. Let me move on to another question. And I'm just picking certain questions, and there may be others that I think we have responded to, but we may get to. So there's a question about what factors explain the severity of infection and mortality in different regions and countries, China versus Italy versus Singapore versus Germany versus here. And I had a response in there saying, I said about the population we are talking about, comorbidities that exist, the infrastructure that country has, the compliance that we have in terms of social distancing. But there's another thing that I just heard on a School of Medicine call last week about the strains. Apparently the Bay Area has 7 or 8 strains that are different from the strains that were seen in New York. New York strains came mainly from European route, from Italy and other places, whereas the one that we have here are more from Asia. And somehow the conjecture is that the infectiousness, the R0 rate for the virus here, and R0 is not sacrosanct, so is CFR. CFR is also not sacrosanct, these change. But underlying biological, the virology of the strains, it seems like that's different between these 2 regions, for example, New York and San Space. Can you both, Sanjeev and Saroja, can you talk about what explains the differences in the severity and the mortality that we are seeing in these different regions?
I can give you my comment.
Who said that? Go ahead.
No, I think, there was an article comparing really what happened in Asia versus Europe versus US. looking at the time at which people, everybody blamed China, but once that happened, Taiwan and South Korea had very different experiences, and to some extent Germany compared to Italy. And there's also head-to-head comparison of Sweden versus Norway, where the fundamental difference appears to be the rate at which they started testing very early on and started doing contact distancing and all this kind of tracing to put people aside. So it was more than a strain problem biologically. It was really a public health a solution that actually made the difference early on. I think South Korea and Taiwan in particular, after the SARS experience, they really overreacted in such a manner in which they had testing in place in a big hurry. And in fact, South Korea and US both found out about the first incidence was on the same day, but the reactions were dramatically different. We had a situation where people are calling it a hoax, and there they went into the other extreme and put in all these testing and other such things in place. So Anurag, your point is very well taken about different kinds of strains that has to be addressed. But I think early on, the differences appear to be really fundamentally based on the public health policy approaches that made a difference. I think that's my two cents.
But I do want to hear Saroja and Sanjeev's thoughts on that. Saroja, do you want to go first?
Is it, you're talking about the different incidents and spreading?
The differences in severity and the mortality. Ramani just brought up Sweden. Sweden is now experiencing a pretty rapid increase, and they had not followed any of the protocols that we followed here. For example, Singapore is going through a lockdown now. Japan, I was in Japan in February, early February, and there was no. I was in a packed bus when I traveled there to one of the most affected places, Hokkaido region. So they're suffering now. So I agree with your points, Ramani, that a lot of that is about that. But is there a biological reason also? Are there different kinds of strains? So
I do think there is a fundamental difference beyond just the social policy. I do think the social policy and the government policy is a huge factor, okay? And people's following of that, etc. But I think you can't look at the numbers that are coming out on the severity rate, the death rate in African Americans and just brush that off. And it seems to be, I think we have to look more fundamentally. Is it some difference, some biological, maybe, but it right now seems to track with overall health status ahead of time. So were you generally in good health? Were you obese? Did you have chronic lung issues? Did you have chronic any health disorders that are of the sort that are making for the worst case scenarios here? What is the time period before different people even get care or go for care? People are avoiding hospitals now. I mean, literally, many of the hospitals have reported people are coming in with cardiovascular symptoms post-stroke by days, post-heart attack. This was on the news 2 days ago.
70% decline in number of stroke treatments in the hospitals. 70%. Stroke is an emergent condition, and people are not showing up at the hospital even after they have stroke and heart attack.
And when they are later.
Yeah.
It turns out they already are well past the ideal treatment window. But my point was that people are also avoiding care and may not have easy access to care. And if you don't have insurance, even if the government says, we won't charge you for this, there is a lack of familiarity, a custom habit of going to the doctor. I think all of this is playing in. And are these the people who are in the essential jobs? Are they the people who are the least protected? I really don't think we know all of this, but there is something undeniable beyond the
Can I ask a follow-up question? Can I ask a very quick follow-up, because this relates to India, which is a country we all care about. So if there's, if a primary factor, one of the primary factors is, health status of people and our ability to deal with that, then is India at a significant risk then compared to some of the more developed healthcare systems where health status is presumably better at a population level. And then Amita, maybe you can ask your question.
I'll just quickly say it depends. We still don't know what are those things that make the person at most risk. If it's obesity, maybe not in the same population. If it's general health, maybe so. It's until we really have a good handle on why certain subpopulations, etc., are having such bad outcomes compared to others. It's hard to project, because under some of those circumstances, India could be way worse off. Under some of them, they might be okay. Who knows?
Yeah.
You had a question, but I'm happy to chat later. Yeah, Amita.
Yeah, I wanted to share. I just shared a website that has
Yes,
Next Train Team website that really shows nice phylogeny of the coronavirus and the genomic epidemiology. Haven't dug in a lot, but it is very clear, you know, like the New York, what happened in New York versus what happened in San Francisco. There were different mutations in the virus.
But I looked at it, and the phylogeny tracks from the first patient in early December to now. They're tracking.
Yeah.
But what is very interesting is all these mutations are not in those 120 amino acids where
exactly
the spike protein that is binding.
Yeah. So it hasn't evolved like HIV, where you have type 1, 2 different types. So it's still the same, and it still is infective. It hasn't yet moved to a place where it's yes.
Mutations are the ones where influenza mutations every year CDC has 3 different strains, right, in the flu vaccine. Or there are other mutating viruses. HIV is one of them. It's hard to make a vaccine. This is unlike it. This is actually much smaller than the SARS-CoV-2 from a length standpoint. General consensus, what I've read of the folks, is that it is unlikely to rapidly mutate. And my opinion of the differences are clearly in one, the culture, whether it is distancing, whether it is obeying the government versus, in China, if they say wear mask, every person will wear a mask. They anyway wear masks. They're not going to question it. Whereas here, individualism, so that balance of individualism versus community, that cultural contact tracing. I mean, Germany had corona taxis. So they had actually corona taxis where their taxis would go to the place, check them if somebody felt like they were exposed. If they're positive, they were asked to isolate, they were monitoring. I mean, and that's German, it's a stereotypical German management. And that is why, so there's one thing about incidence and second about fatality. And German fatality is very, very low because of their excellent management. I think we are also going to learn a lot from what is happening in New York, all this thing about intubations and what is the right way to manage these patients. Our fatalities are going to come down, definitely. There's no doubt about it. I've got tremendous confidence. Infectious, if we follow these, even if we open the beaches, but if we follow, in my opinion, face masking, keep a distance, I think it will still be okay, in my opinion. Not immediately, but within a month or whatever the models indicate.
So what I'm
make a quick comment about
go ahead.
About the strains, about the the different kinds of. I think being an RNA virus like HIV and others, there's a likelihood that there'll be a lot of mutant strains around, but whether they'll be clinically relevant or not and have an impact, we will know only after vaccine comes into play. Because that's when you'll really know how effective the vaccines are, and seasonally over a period of time when we learn that. Right now, it's very early to sort of.
And if it puts a evolutionary pressure. I'll say one more thing about the care. One really good example is the move towards proning patients, which is putting them on their stomach.
Yes.
It seems to be, many doctors are saying it is extremely effective. It's the last step measure before they intubate or anything. If we prone them, many of those patients avoid having to go to intubation. Is that anecdotal? Is that the stats? How is it holding up? We'll see. But that may be a very simple management approach.
Yeah. It's more than anecdotal now, Saroja. There are now papers that talk about proning.
Yeah. Well, I know we have a lot of really interesting questions, and we could actually go longer. We only had 20 minutes for the Q&A. So why don't we stop here, because we are eating into Robert's time to talk about some exciting things that are coming. Robert, I'll hand it over to you.
Okay, perfect. Can everyone hear me okay? Can see my slides?
We do.
All right, great. All right, so we're going to switch gears here for the last few minutes, folks. And thanks for everyone joining us. We have 34 people online, which is great to see given the kind of 24-hour notice we provided here. So for the last few minutes, I want to provide some update here on EPPIC overall, what we've been up to, and what our plans are in the near term and how you can get involved, right? So gonna just cover off 3 slides. So we're gonna try and keep this last portion here to only about 10 or 15 minutes at the most. But really the 3 topics I wanna cover with everyone are our strategic framework. We spent a lot of time on this over the last period of months to really pull this together and get it fully aligned across the group. We'll then spend a few minutes talking about our value model, all right? Who should be part of EPPIC? What are the different membership categories and what are we offering? And then finally, how do you become a member? So, strategic framework, all right? So we spent, like I mentioned, a good bit of time, and I think for folks who've been involved in EPPIC, which are most people on this call, I mean, this is really no surprise. At the same time, you know, I think to document this in one place and be able to share it like we are now is something relatively new. So I want to spend some time walking through this with everyone on the call. So firstly, our goal. Our goal is to be a leading forum for healthcare and life science professionals in the regions it serves, right? I think pretty straightforward. I think for those who've been involved in EPPIC, that's been a consistent goal for us. And similarly, our strategic positioning. We talk a lot about networking, mentorship, and entrepreneurial support. So we say that our strategic position is to be a premium forum for networking, mentorship, and entrepreneurial support of professionals in the healthcare and life science industry. Okay, and we also mention and pay justice to the fact that we are specifically angling towards folks who are in or have a connection with the U.S.-India corridor. Now, certainly that's not to say that we are only targeting U.S.-Indian type of content or events, but that is a part of our demographics, part of our history, and we acknowledge that. But on top of that, we certainly are targeting, more broadly speaking, this intersection between technology and healthcare as relates to serving mentorship, networking, and entrepreneurial support. So how do we do that? How do we enable these goals to happen, and how do we maintain this strategic positioning? So this really starts with our member base. And so what we describe here as our core pillar is growing our membership fundamentally. And this speaks to the fact that we need to understand who our members are. We need to understand what is it we're providing to our members, and we need to build a robust strategy around how we're going to continue to grow that member base. And so the strategy that we have is really, I would say, summarized in these 5 enabling pillars. Okay, so these 5 enabling pillars we'll walk through here briefly. And the idea here is that each of these pillars provide one portion of what collectively will help us to grow our member base and ultimately achieve our goal. So the first pillar on the far left talks about developing a high caliber, diverse leadership. Okay, that's really an internal capability, refers to when we have members, when we have people who are part of our member base, how do we make sure that there's a pipeline there? How do we make sure those folks are becoming leaders within our organization that can be basically a funnel into both the EC as well as the board, as well as into the broader community that we serve. We then talk about having a sustained value-focused programming. All right, so we've seen this in the past. That's things like all the events we hold, EPICon, quarterly events, etc. How do we maintain that programming in a way that's holding true and holding its value? And value being both in terms of the value that we provide to our members being realized, as well as staying true to our own values in terms of the type of programming. We then talk about our partnerships, which is our third column, which is really making sure we engage with other organizations, right? I mean, I think our ability to execute is partially limited by how many folks we're able to pull in and leverage. And so how do we keep our partnerships alive? That's partnerships like our corporations we work with, other similar nonprofit organizations, as well as academia. And there's a number of partnerships outside of that as well that we're looking to potentially add on to. We then also talk about our fourth pillar, which is messaging and thought leadership. And that's really, I would say, something that we're taking a very active stance on right now. And that's actually what we're doing at present, right? It's, how do we create thought leadership and messaging that's outside of our typical forums in terms of our in-person events? So that's going to be things like webinars, and today's a great example of that. How do we expand over and above that? How do we create more content through electronic communication, through, say, our website or through social media? And then finally, financial sustainability. So we need to continue to improve our internal systems and practices around maintaining our finances. So this is an action-packed slide, which really summarizes a lot of the discussion we've had internally and a lot of what you've probably seen over the last number of years. But we're really now structuring ourselves very closely to this. And so we're building an internal organizational structure to support this vision and coming up with clear goals in line with this. And so that's probably as much detail as I'm going to go into in this presentation, given we only have a few minutes here, but I just want to provide this kind of all in one place, and I'm happy to answer any questions on this towards the back end of this, as well as offline as we get more interest. But I do want to then transition here and talk then, okay, we have this strategic framework, but what are we actually providing, right? And that's where we talk about our value model. So we have to be clear about what our value truly is with EPPIC, all right? And it really is us. And what I mean by that, it's the inherent value that we bring. I mean, there's 34 of us here who decided it was a good usage of our time on a Sunday to call into this webinar and contribute to this conversation. And it's that type of robust sense of community and sense of interest in healthcare space which has kept EPPIC around, and it's kept EPPIC relevant and robust. So it's really our ability to mentor a wide range of professionals through our own successes that we've had collectively. It's also our deep passion for healthcare, as well as our expertise in a diverse set of healthcare domains. So we're really looking to leverage this value and provide that to our member base. And through that, we're creating a bit of a different model than we've used historically. So firstly, we're taking an active stance now to actually establish clear different membership levels, okay? So historically, we've only had the charter membership level clearly defined, whereby after that, his membership has typically been defined as those who sign up for and attend our events like EPICon. Moving forward, we're trying to really create a more member-based model as opposed to an event-based model. And so what we're doing here is defining different membership categories that will look to drive programming content and different types of content to be very specifically angled at, to create value within these different buckets. So there's 4 categories, and actually 5 categories, right? So on an individual level, individuals can join as a charter member at a rate of $500 per year, an entrepreneur member at $200 per year, a professional member and a student member at $150 per year respectively. Finally, also we acknowledge our corporate members, who are also a key part of this model. So who are we looking to join, right? And it's a pretty, we're not excluding too many folks here, but to just put it down, look, I mean, entrepreneurs are for sure part of this community. Many of us on this call are entrepreneurs, and that's one of the biggest, most robust communities that we serve. But also it's many professionals in healthcare and many professionals who are not in healthcare. So folks who are not in healthcare but want to get into healthcare to have access to our network, for example, as well as folks in healthcare who want to have either influence or seeking broader connection base. In general, we would seek to have these folks be the type of folks who would fall under these charter and entrepreneur categories, whereby we would also look to have, high school, university students, as well as entry and mid-level professionals join us within these membership categories. We are looking to create content that would be specific to those, value offerings that are specific to those different member types. And then finally, corporations. And I would say we're still in the process of driving our value statements as far as corporations are concerned. I would say we've developed clear value models for corporations that sponsor us as part of our events, but we're also exploring the potential to create, say, corporate members that are more ongoing affiliations with our group. So what are we actually offering, right? And that's the key question here. And there's a lot more detail behind this, but in a nutshell, it's really network access, mentorship, and specialized domain knowledge. So across these 3 areas, we're in the process, and we've already identified a number of unique value offerings across these 4 member type areas within these kind of specific offering types. And so we're in the process of doing more to define this, and we have a lot of conversation happening internally at the moment. But at a high level, these are the 3 areas that we're really focusing on. And we'll look to achieve those through a combination of in-person events, as well as different types of content to be distributed online. So finally, and this is my last slide for everyone, how do you become part of EPPIC? All right. So firstly, we're aiming for significant growth. So we are changing our value model. We're changing our strategic strategy, and we're really getting more defined around that. So to join today, what would you get? You're going to get a much more in-depth focus on, or look on what I just brought you there, right? So a more enhanced visibility to what we're actually doing internally. We're looking to get people to have firsthand ownership within our organization. So you can see on the right-hand side, that's a picture of our organizational structure, which is a direct map of effectively our strategic plan, and really be part of the movement. I think we're at a formative stage right now where we're looking to really pivot and really broaden our impact and really structure our member base. And so being part today gives you insight into how we're taking that off the ground. So one question is, what do we plan to do in the next year? All right. And it's really in this order. So where we are today is we're really actively setting up our communications and our finance platforms. That's through primarily our website as well as social media platforms. Once those are set up, we'll launch. All right. And through that launch, we'll enable content on a variety of platforms, which will really kick off our formal recruitment phase, where we'll look to really angle at driving recruitment across those different membership categories. And we look to get to that phase over the next couple of months. We'll then look to apply those learnings and scales. As we move into the 2021, we certainly look to ramp up and really scale this to be more broad-basing electronically, and then see how we can convert that into bigger in-person events, clearly also contingent on where COVID-19 goes and our ability to host those in-person events. Another question might be, how would I be able to get involved once I am a member? Okay, so as you can see, we're creating different types of teams internally. What I would say at a high level is you can either be involved in strategizing, so strategizing in terms of how we drive our value and how we're growing our organization, as well as execution. So execution on helping us build these systems and develop our content. And the focus within those areas is really through those 5 pillars, which you have on the right-hand side, which are summarized as leadership, programming, partnerships, communications, and finance. All right, so finally, sounds great, right? So what's next? So right now we are accepting accepting applications for charter members. I've provided a link here, and we'll provide that link out through email following this event. As mentioned, we're looking for $500 for a 1-year membership as being a charter member. Okay, and so that's really it. So I just want to say thank you very much, and I'm sure Sanjeev, Amita, Anurag, feel free to chime in, but it was great to have everyone join us on such a short notice. I want to show here just on the right-hand side, these are the current board members in blue, as well as our EC members in orange. So we have a great crew that's fully mobilized and rallying to achieve our goals. And we're looking forward to hopefully having some charter members joining us soon. So thank you very much.
No, this has been wonderful, wonderful to have everybody join. Thank you so much. And thank you to Saroja, to Sanjeev, and to Robert for preparing, and also Anurag for moderating our session. This was really helpful. I think we made. I think this is the power of this organization, that we can get together like this and have discussions. So I've been hearing getting a lot of text, and also watching the questions here. People want to have these kinds of sessions and content like this, and so we would love to get more ideas from you, and we would like to see how we can do this more. But we need our members to contribute and participate. That's the only way we can do this. It's a self-run organization. So love for your contributions, and we would hope that you can become a member, any kind of member, that is charter membership. But Robert also showed, if you go to the previous slides, different levels of membership, and we are planning to show, to provide different kinds of content as well, and host different things for the different kind of membership. So hopefully we'll continue to grow the EPPIC family and provide meaningful things for you.